it's Nicole, and I'm back today jumping into my Easter kit for my Creating with Collection series. There are 13 other process videos related to this kit, as well as some kit contents, kit updates, that kind of thing. I think I started this in March or April of last year. And I kind of just work on it when I have time and I'm in the mood. And I'm really in the mood to sort of wrap it up so that I can move on to kind of another large project like this. I notice that I'm better at continuing to make layouts and continuing to make videos if I have a large project and then like smaller projects that I can kind of bounce around between. So my original thought with this layout was I was going to revisit a lot of the 2-inch squares that I still have from that pattern paper. However, I ended up going with a larger size square. So the square die that I ended up using is actually about 2¼ inches. So I didn't actually end up using any of those 2x2 squares, and it wasn't until tonight when I went to edit the video that I thought about the fact that I could have still cut out, 3, 4, 5 of those 2x2 squares and kind of layered them and turned them into embellishments, but I just didn't think about it. So I had briefly shown kind of to the camera, a lot of times I will just do like a quick sketch when I kind of have an idea come to mind and I'm not going to be able to put that idea into motion for a while. This layout took me probably 8 or 9 days because it was one of those things where I just didn't have a lot of dedicated time to sit here. And because I had taken such a long break between working with this kit, I just was kind of all over the place, and that tends to slow down my process. It's almost like I subconsciously avoid finishing the layout, therefore I start doing things that are time consuming, like stitching, making your own alphabet titles, die cutting your own embellishments, and that was kind of where I went with this. So my main idea was kind of this here, where I was going to have 3 rows of squares and then I was going to have a large die cut title. But as I was laying things out, that area where I thought that the title was going to be was a lot bigger than what I had kind of predicted that it would be when I just kind of did a quick sketch. So I am going to eventually go and cut a couple extra squares with the pattern paper scraps and kind of move some of the photos around. And I ended up liking the arrangement a little bit better by doing that, because it did give just a little bit more breathing room by bringing in some more pattern paper and spreading out my photos. My photos are basically just like the Mother's Day gifts that my kids gave me in 2019. And this was something that I really missed in 2020 because it was all the stuff that the teachers kind of helped them put together when they're at school. So it's kind of the only time your kids really can surprise you with something that you didn't know about, or your husband didn't take them to the store and you gave him idea. Like, these are things that they make at school and they bring home, and they're kind of those homemade keepsake type things. So I definitely missed that this year. This year was more, well, I guess not this year, it would have been 2020. Went practical, and like I had mentioned in another video, I ended up upgrading my desktop computer, which was definitely needed. So here is pretty much where I kind of started realizing that I need to kind of add another row and spread things out. Now, I just took a piece of tape and ripped it into 3 pieces, and this was sort of an indicator to myself that those were the spots that I wanted to leave open and basically do a like stitched square and have the white textured cardstock from the background become one of these squares. And again, did I need to stitch on this layout? No. Would it have been faster if I didn't? Of course. This was kind of where things led. And on one hand, I like when I get to the end of a kit like this because the scraps really do dictate what you can do with your layout. But at the same time, I start thinking about other things that I could stitch on this. I should make my own letters, like things that take time, but at the same time, they're things that I can be doing when my kids are using their computers and they're kind of quiet things. Some of them I don't even need to film. Like here, I just freehanded the holes for my stitching. I just used a ruler, drew a border with a pencil, and then just poked holes. The rulers do have like indications where you can pierce and have it be perfectly even and stuff. My specific size squares just didn't line up on my ruler, so I chose to eyeball them. They're a little wonky. That's okay. Most of it's going to get covered up later anyways. And it does kind of go with the theme of the homemade aspect of the Mother's Day gifts, and you've got some things on here. Most of the embellishments, my title, the stitched squares, all of that is very much homemade, very much DIY. So it definitely supports the theme and the like general feeling of the layout. So that's probably what happened in my subconscious while I was doing my planning and figuring out where I was going to go with all of this. So I stitched around the 3 open squares that I left, which is some white embroidery thread. I pull one piece out of the 6 strands, I fold it in half, and I start with the loop method so that I only have to tape the end. That's what I do in cross stitch, so that's just kind of what works for me. I know with Allison Davis, she has a lot of information online as far as her recommended needle size, thread count, that kind of thing. I've tried her recommended needle size, and for me, it didn't work out. I personally like to use the same size needles that I use in cross stitch, and in cross stitch, I like an 18 count Aida fabric. And so the needles that I use with that, I think are like a size 24. So to me, it's like I would rather just have one size needle so that when I inevitably lose one, either in scrapbooking or cross stitching, I can go to the other area and just pillage from that stash until I order new ones. From there, I went ahead and started making dickers, which if you don't know what dickers are, it's basically DIY thickers. I go through, and in this case, I'm just using cheap white cardstock I keep like a page protector on my desk where I just put any kind of scrap that's like white cardstock, grid paper, anything like that. And that's what I cut from. So I cut 3 layers from the cheap white cardstock, and then the letters that you can see that are turned sideways, that's so that I know that's the good paper. I cut those with Bristol Smooth cardstock, which I buy mine at Michael's because it's just easier. Typically, anytime I run in there, I'll grab a pad of it. And then I grabbed this die set from Spellbinders, which I was a member of their like die of the month club for a while. And so this was one of them. It was from April of 2019. And it's these really pretty like layered florals. So I took this downstairs, and while I was kind of listening and helping 2nd grade, I cut all these out. I did 2 layers of each color, and I stacked those together as well. I think I knew that my title was going to have dimension with the layers and things like that. And I was worried that if I only did 1 layer and glued them on top of the stitching, that it would kind of look a little wimpy. But I didn't factor in that these are a layering die set. So it ends up being 2 layers of the darker color, 2 layers of the lighter shade, 2 layers of the center of the floral. Like, these were getting pretty thick. And I was having a hard time figuring out which pieces went to which flower. And by the time I got smart enough to look up a couple YouTube videos, I figured out there was actually like more layers to these flowers, but I chose to kind of omit them. I felt like at this point they were good enough for me, and that was just how it was going to go. I did, and I used liquid glue. It's my favorite liquid glue. It's the Nuvo one. And glued whatever I could down flat to the page. Anything that was sort of straddling another piece and wouldn't lay flat, I just tucked some foam strips behind it that worked for me. Whatever's going on underneath it doesn't need to look good for me. It just needs to do its job and stay in place so that by the time I put this in an album, and we all know that's going to be like a year from now, I just need it to still be glued to the page and still be in the spot I put it in. So for me, it's a mix of liquid glue and foam adhesive most of the time with layered things like this. And I think my idea to cut my own florals kind of stemmed from the fact that I only had 2 die cuts that were florals, and I really wanted 3, and I didn't have the little piece of pattern paper that has a floral pattern on it. The flowers were too small to kind of fussy cut out. The scrap was too small for my square die, so I couldn't use the floral pattern paper. But in my mind, Mother's Day reads as florals, whether you get flowers or not. It just kind of, in my mind, in a spring, quote unquote, Easter collection, I'm going to lean towards the floral icons in that. But at this point, I've kind of used them up. And so this is layout 14. I did 15 and 16, which I'm hoping to be able to edit as soon as possible. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get another one done tonight or not. I would love to. But I did put a community post on my channel. I'm not sure. Typically it shows up in your subscription feed, whether that's on your phone. I think on a desktop you actually have to go to my channel and go to a community post. But I posted a picture of what is left of my kit currently, and then a poll of, should I stop or should I try to get one more layout out of what I have left? Because I think I can probably get one more without being just completely grossed out by myself. I've definitely reached the point where I'm like, I no longer like this line. And I think it's just because I've used it for so long. It's kind of like when, you eat a lot of the same thing and you're just like, I never want to eat this again. You do. You just don't want to eat any more of it at that moment. So the top layer of my alphabets, I have grabbed a Lawn Fawn ink pad. I think this is the mermaid color. And I'm just putting color on it. I had thought about doing like a light layer of color and then bringing in like a pattern stamp. But I stamped it on my scratch paper and I wasn't in love with it, and I really didn't want to mess up my letters and test a letter. So I chose to just kind of go with my go-to of making either the top of the letters or the bottom of the letters a little bit darker and have kind of like a gradient. With this being a dye ink, it does look a little bit splotchy. It definitely smoothed out as it dried. But I picked a dye ink thinking that I was going to stamp on top of it. Had I known that that wasn't going to work out, I probably would have picked a Distress Oxide because the way the inks are formulated, they just smooth out a lot better for things like this. But like I said, I 100% thought that I was going to do like tone-on-tone stamping on top of my letters, and it went a different way. And I didn't even think to go and ink over the dye ink with an oxide. I just kind of left it. I think it kind of goes with the homemade vibe of everything else going on with the layout, so it's fine. It definitely looks like a hot mess when they're drying because you're just kind of like, man, these are ugly. Like, they're splotchy. They're not even the color that I thought that they would be. But I've known to just put it down, walk away, come back the next day, and by the time the ink has settled into the paper and they've dried, it's a little bit splotchy, even with it being dry, but it just looks 10 times better. It even looks way better in person than it does on like the video. The video camera kind of distorts some things for some reason. Like it hates my grid mat. I don't know if it looks a mess to you guys, but on the editing side of things, it hates my grid mat, but if I take the grid mat away, it won't focus on anything. Here I'm clearly demonstrating some squirrel syndrome. I was keeping my scraps off to the side, and I kept looking at them and I kept thinking, okay, am I going to be able to get more layouts out of this? And if I start thinking about how I want a layout to look or something that I think might work, I will just grab whatever piece of paper is closest to me and make myself like a little sketch to where I can go back and look at it and figure out, okay, is that something that I do want to do, or is that going to work? It's basically, I have the worst memory in the world. So as soon as I have an idea, I have to write it down. So a lot of times, you know, I typically have like a to-do list or even like a list of, okay, I need to film this video. I need to edit this video. I need to make sure that I turn in my link to this person if I'm on a hop or something like that. I'm pretty good about staying organized with that, but if you ever flip the back of that paper over, it's like sketches and like scribbled notes of, I want to try this technique. I need to find these photos. I need to make sure I don't duplicate these photos, like things like that. I will write it down as soon as it pops into my mind. So from there, I went through and pulled out anything that I thought basically wouldn't clash with what I already have. So I grabbed like the mason jar with the flowers. I grabbed a phrase that says my peeps, a phrase that says smile. I think there was 2 dragonfly images and maybe like it's a yellow circle with some text on it. And then I added my date stamp. And then journaling I typically will do way before I do the date stamp, but this particular day we had no internet for the entire day, and thankfully it was a pre-scheduled day off of school, but could not print anything, so I kind of had to wait until we got our internet back up so that my Wi-Fi would kind of stop freaking out. Some things I can print just on the Wi-Fi system. Some of them, it's like, no, you need to have internet because I'm too tired or something. I don't even know. I knew that I wasn't going to have this big, long, meaningful journaling that I was going to do. So I measured the space that I had underneath my title. I made sure that my journaling basically was contained within 1 line, but I also wanted to make sure that it was long enough. So I did go through and like add a couple words here and there after I had originally typed it. And then I went ahead and layered some cardstock behind that journaling strip as well. You can definitely do foam strips for that. I chose to just kind of mimic the die cut letters and have it match that. So with that, that is the end of this process video. Like I said, I've got 2 more, and then you can go vote on my poll and let me know if you think that I can get a 17th layout out of this kit. With that, I will say bye, and I will catch you guys later.